The radical left has taken over the Democratic Party.
Hello and welcome to Think Progressively, covering politics and all the other chaos life has to offer. This is episode 78, recorded on Saturday, October 29th from Milwaukee. I'm Joe.
And I'm Jason.
And on today's episode, we look into cash bail and bail reform. But first, the headlines.
Up yours, woke moralists. We'll see who cancels who.
Up first, Jason has a fun story to tell us. He went to his very first school board meeting, and it was crazy.
Was a real hoot. So, as a continuation of the story that we first mentioned in the When the Emperor Was Divine episode, where the Muskego School Board essentially denied a request by the English program to have a book about Japanese-American detainment during World War II, and there is still, this group of teachers, parents, students that are upset about it. It's something that's still not resolved, and they had the yearly budget meeting this week for the Muskego School Board. So I went with a few of the other people that were involved.
You were literally asked to go, right?
Yes, yeah. They were like, and they said ahead of time, one of the things that they're going to be voting on is their pay for the school board members. And the previous year, it was voted to give them a raise of $500, and that was mostly handling of COVID, things like that. I guess they had done that very well. And now, after everything that happened, and this was like things that we didn't really report on that were more personally involved with some of the people that were, fighting back against the, not having that book be allowed, where there was a lot of interaction between school board members and these teachers and parents and community members online that was very aggressive. There was one person who actually is a police officer in Milwaukee who is on the school board in Muskego, made a fake account online and started trashing the people involved there. So there's a lot of friction.
Real integrity stuff.
Right, yeah. What you'd want from a police officer. So it was proposed that they would like to try to take that $500 raise away. And that was kind of the goal, or at least make it so that they did not get another raise this year because of all of those actions. So we sat, listened to kind of the boring presentation about how great the school is doing and, all the slides and charts, most of which, even though there was very few people there, you couldn't even see just because it's very poorly presented, which I thought was kind of hilarious coming from a school board where, they don't understand how to make a presentation. Big enough so that anyone could see it in the room, which is kind of fun. I hope they're teaching their students better than that. But it came time for that vote on what the school board salary would be. So it was proposed to take the $500 away to go back down to what they were previously, which I believe currently the salaries are $5,500 a year for members, $6,500 a year for the school board president. So they wanted to bring it back to $5,000 and $6,000. This sparked just a huge amount of backlash. There were not that many people there. There were some school board groupies there. I don't know if this...
It's the PTA.
Yeah, I'm guessing that it probably was a PTA members or PTA president or whatever. But oh my, they did not want to hear any negativity directed towards any of the school board members. And they were very upset. There was an older lady who said that, and this was in reference to whether or not CRT is being taught. By the way, it got there because I guess the school board president had attended a meeting locally at a bar entitled "The ABCs of CRT," in which a lot of the people there basically just trashed teachers the whole time. So they were upset. Why is our school board president?
I think I know exactly what thing you're talking about. Oh no.
So that came up, and the school board president was like, how dare you tell me that I can't go to a meeting if I want to go to a meeting? And it's like, yeah, but you're not addressing the bigger issue of why would you support these people that are just trashing the education system when you're a school board president? That doesn't seem to make much sense. But this older lady, in response to people saying like, there's no CRT being taught in that grade level, like the K through 12, that just does not happen. She said, "You don't know what's going on out there. I've been to every school board meeting, both in this community and outside of it." So she's apparently at a school board meeting. Right, enthusiast, and that's all she does because she's retired. What else, I guess, are you going to do if you watch Fox News all day than to just go at every boring school board meeting and talk about CRT? And then she started a prepared rant talking about the difference between truth and fact and opinion. Oh, yeah. And I started laughing. I could not help but laugh. It was hilarious. And she got really upset at that. I did want it stated, she said that I was giggling. I wanted it stated on the record that I indeed was laughing. I'm too big to giggle, but.
Oh, no.
So, and when this whole debate started, when they were going to take a vote, the school board, and this is all online, anyone that wants to view it can, I don't know why you would, we'll link it in the show notes, but the school board president started off by saying, well, obviously we're not going to vote for this. This is, our own salaries, we have too much integrity, we would never participate in this vote for obvious reasons. But then once it was proposed to lower their salaries, and obviously there were enough of us in the small crowd to make the difference on that, then they changed their minds and they decided that they were going to vote. The measure to remove the $500 raise that they had gotten did fail by a small margin, but then the school board groupie actually proposed a $500 raise, which thankfully also failed on a very small margin, one vote. So I'd like to think that my presence there helped with that. So their salary does stay the same. But yeah, basically it turned into like this huge back and forth with, someone on this side is commenting and then somebody on that side's it got really kind of tense. And I don't think normally school board meetings are like that. But it was an adventure for my first one ever. I think I got to see a really good one.
Wow. And for viewers listening, like it was like 9:30 at night. And also, I just getting like all these messages, like, "Dude, I just got done with the school board. It was insane. Oh my god!" Right.
It started at 7. I don't think they're normally that long either. But it just kept getting drug out because like everyone wanted the last word when it came to this. It was pretty fun.
Well, good job. I commend you on doing your civic duty.
It's the first time I'd ever been in that. I'm not from Muskego originally, so I did not go to school here.
It's coming in. It's like, what is happening? Oh, I'm sorry. Yet I still commend you for your service.
Thank you.
Next up, I want to talk about a Twitter thread. And I actually messaged you about this, Jason. And I was just kind of curious to get your more thoughts on it.
This is actually what I was responding to. You'd messaged me this while I was at the school board meeting, so I didn't get it initially.
Right.
Yeah.
House progressives press Biden to engage in direct talks with Russia and Ukraine. And basically, the Progressive Caucus put out a big statement saying that they are looking for more negotiations between Russia and Ukraine and that they're wanting America to step in and help with peace negotiations because they don't want the war to continue any further, which was very odd considering a lot of these people's stances on the Ukrainian war. And it got lots of pushback online. Progressive Caucus leader Pramila Jayapal even put out a statement clarifying that they still support Ukraine through all of this, but still don't want to see nuclear war. And people hated that as well because she took some pretty harsh stances in favor of Ukraine against Russia before. I don't know what's going on here.
I think both can be true. You can say, we should do everything in our power to stop a war that is costing lives. And also, we support the sovereign nation of Ukraine that was invaded by Russia. I don't think those two things are fundamentally opposed. I just think the idea of, the United States should take the lead in these negotiations, that's great, but
what are they going to do?
I mean, if Putin's not going to be willing to concede to the obvious demands that Ukraine is going to have, which is no Russian troops anywhere in Ukraine and including Crimea, they're not going to agree to that, obviously. And
that's the weird part about this, though, is that this progressive. So this was a letter originally signed by 30 representatives of the Progressive Caucus. That is not the entirety of the Progressive Caucus.
Right. It did include Wisconsin's
Mark Pocan.
Yep, Mark Pocan.
And Gwen Moore,
Mm-hmm.
which, again, angered a lot of Wisconsin progressives. But also, weirdly, a lot of other progressives I saw in Wisconsin were like super into it, and I don't know why. And again, it's just because after all of this we've been through with Ukraine and Russia, and the entire world basically giving the middle finger to Putin about it, now they're saying, well, because he threatened nuclear war, which he's been doing this entire time, let's negotiate a settlement and give Russia what they want. And what's even weirder about it is that now you also had other reps backing away from it. Mark Pocan from Wisconsin actually distanced himself from the letter, saying this was actually written back in June during the summer, back when it earlier happened. And he has no idea why it was even released now. It was actually super bad timing. I don't know. He doesn't really agree with it anymore. You had reps like Ro Khanna from California, who is still in favor of the letter and saying that we should actually have a settlement negotiation and America should take part in that. But also Ukraine should get the say in whether or not they should give up their own land, but we're going to help them give up their own land. I do not understand the strategy behind this. I don't understand the point behind this.
Well, and the timing too.
Right.
Right before the midterms.
I mean, my only guess, honestly, and I'm still trying to figure this out, is from a strategic standpoint, progressives are seeing the midterms coming and they're seeing economy still struggling right now. And they're trying to do things to mitigate those issues. And they know that, but basically they're trying to pull a Germany right now, where Germany was kind of on the fence to begin with because of their
dependence on
that for
Russian
their
national
economy.
gas. Yeah.
Right. I think they were trying to do something similar to that, but that was so stupid. It's so stupid. And now you have Democrats in disarray again, but it's from the progressive side who are trying to take this weirdly more moderate position that makes absolutely no sense.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, I don't disagree with the sentiment, but I just don't know what the purpose is.
And that's exactly my point. I think that's a lot of people's questions too, where it's like, well, of course, like we want to avoid nuclear war, duh. But Putin was already threatening nuclear war when we were giving him the middle finger months ago. So why didn't this come up then? Why didn't we not care about this then?
Right. And Pramila Jayapal has come out and said that it was staffers released.
Yeah, that's where we know they really screwed up when they started blaming the staffer.
Right. Like, well, we didn't mean to put this out there. They just did it on their own, which doesn't that would not happen. Like, oh, this document that's got all these signatures. Yeah, I'll just randomly release it whenever I feel like it.
Well, right. It makes absolutely no sense. And in my personal opinion, shame on Jayapal, shame on the Progressive Caucus for doing such a stupid thing. And good job at making us look all like idiots. That's all I gotta say. Let's bring things back home for our next one. A new Wisconsin report shows the widest score gap between black and white students in the nation.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel about this?
I think it is a consequence of what we went through with the pandemic. And as you can see from the graphs, and we'll link the article if you can get to it. That's a whole other issue. But
gotta love paywalls, man.
Yeah, the scores have gone down across the country. In Wisconsin, they went down much less than in a lot of other states.
Correct.
But that type of learning, the remote learning, one, you lean very heavily on your parents' ability to be home to supervise.
Yep.
And the access to both computer hardware and high-speed internet, which, that the cost falls on the parents. And in disadvantaged areas, that both of those things are going to be less likely to be available. So I see it as kind of a almost obvious outcome of what we went through.
I don't think it's surprising by any means. I mean, so we already talked about before, and when we're trying to be honest with the pandemic's consequences and during the shutdowns of the schools and things like that, we already acknowledged earlier on that students were suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And we knew that, and that really sucked, and we had to make some tough decisions. And obviously I care more about students not dying.
Right, and teachers and
teachers,
staff.
and students' families.
Right.
And, how about not splitting a literal plague?
Right.
So
But this was going to be an issue,
Yes.
obviously, and it's not something that anyone wanted.
And on top of that, you also had lots of reports saying how disenfranchised communities were also being affected greater than those in more like suburban and white communities.
Right.
And this is, I think, just another good example of that. And I think one key thing I saw here, and I'll just read it from the article. One key statistic in fourth grade math, white students in Wisconsin scored about 37% higher than black students. The next biggest difference was 18% in Connecticut, Pennsylvania, and Ohio. So we're basically like doubling the disparity.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it just really goes to show that when you don't have infrastructure in place ready to manage these types of situations, especially in disadvantaged communities, this was just always likely to happen.
Mm-hmm. And it's who knows how long it's going to take to try to get that back to a sustainable amount.
It'll take time, a lot of time. And I think what makes me even more upset is obviously they reached out to both gubernatorial candidates about this. Tony Evers said that he proposed lots of spending initiatives in his previous budgets and lots of time in public schools in his previous budgets. Yeah, it's very true. Check out his previous biennial budget. It was great.
Which was, of course, rejected by the state legislature.
Immediately, yeah. And then Tim Michaels also commented saying that scores show the need for his plan to expand taxpayer-funded private school vouchers to, wealthier students.
Right, to destroy public schools.
And again, that just really goes to show, like, Republicans, even in the face of stuff like this, they're going to stick to their nonsense, non-evidence-based bootstrap mentality and say, well, why can't those blacks just get them in line? And there's hope for the best, while consistently destroying the infrastructure that would help fix this problem.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what made me super angry about it.
And it again goes to show the much larger systemic issues that we've talked about previously, our redlining episodes, the Did Slavery End with the 13th Amendment episodes.
And we're about to do cash bail.
Right, and we'll get into it too, where it's obvious that disadvantaged communities don't have the same resources and the same ability to kind of fall back on other methods, like, okay, if you had to be home from work because your kid was going to be home from school, if you have a better job, you're much more likely to be able to work something out versus you have a entry-level position somewhere where they're just going to get rid of you if you're not going to be there every day.
Well, and then on top of it, it's just lack of physical resources too, like actual computers, reliable internet. I remember there were several stories, I think even from Milwaukee, where teachers had to help students who were obviously in these disadvantaged schools use their own like gaming consoles for virtual learning purposes because they did not have a laptop.
Right, because that is a luxury item.
Yes, 100%. And I think we're now starting to move to a system or a society that those things are not luxuries anymore. It is not a luxury to have a car anymore. That was said, even though some idiots still think it is, that was settled decades ago. You have to have a car to live a good life today. And I think nowadays, having internet connections and a laptop or computers is now not a luxury anymore. You have to have those things if you want to stay connected to our society.
And unfortunately, if you want to raise a family.
Yeah, I totally agree. So I guess going back to, again, it just all circles back to tell everyone you know not to vote for Tim Michaels and tell everyone you know to vote for Tony Evers. It's that simple. And in Freebird news, you like what I did there?
Oh, it's very unique. I've not
you.
heard anyone make that reference.
Good. I'm glad because I am an originator of comedy and I know my jokes. It's pretty great. Elon Musk has finally bought Twitter and he did it with style where he immediately started firing everybody.
Did you see this stunt with the sink?
No, I'm scared to even ask.
So,
what is the stunt with the sink?
Apparently, when he went into, and I mean, there's video and pictures of it, when he went into Twitter headquarters, he was carrying a big porcelain sink with him. And someone took a picture, which he tweeted out and said, "Let that sink in." If that doesn't show you that this man should be in charge of absolutely nothing. Yeah, he made some poor staffer go get me a sink. I got it's a really good idea for a joke. Let that sink in. I was like, what? Why would you? That's dumb. Maybe he just found a sink. It's like, I got to do something with it. I don't
Just
know.
rummaging around in Twitter's trash. Hey,
We got a sink. Ugh. But yeah, and the people he fired apparently had clauses in their contracts where they're going to get huge buyouts now.
yep, it's pretty great. And now this was already expected to happen. I'm not sure how much we already talked
These
about.
are people that he's been feuding with
Well, that
for,
too.
a year.
But I was even backing up saying him buying Twitter. Him buying Twitter was almost an inevitability because he could not prove that he should get out of his negotiating deal
Right,
to buy Twitter.
This was back in April.
Yes.
I believe he announced that he was going to buy Twitter. He waived his ability to perform due diligence
Yep.
when it came to the confidential finances and things like that.
And then said, nope, I'm
Right.
gonna not buy it anyway.
Yeah, tried to back out of the deal. There was a $1 billion back out clause,
Yep.
which Twitter obviously sued him over. And it was a day before the deadline for him to either finalize the deal or go to a trial about this. And that's when he decided, well, everyone's telling me that I have no legal standing to be able to do it. Like, I backed myself into a corner, so I guess I'm going to have to do it. And then pretends that this was his plan all along.
Well,
when
yeah, 'cause-
very clearly it wasn't.
Because he's a show guy. Like, that's all he is. He's a complete BSer. He's a liar. He's basically the same thing as Trump, where it doesn't matter what mistakes he does. It doesn't matter how stupid he actually looks. He's going to spin it in a way that makes him look like a genius, and people will fall for it.
Oh, there are so many Elon Musk simps out there.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
People falling all over themselves now to kneel to their king.
So what do you think is going to happen now with Twitter?
I don't think there are going to be any wholesale changes. And Musk's already kind of backed off of his like free speech absolutist stance already and saying like, well, look, I know it can't just be say whatever you want because no one is going to advertise on that platform, which is how Twitter makes money. So he knows very well that he's not going to be able to just open it up for anyone to say whatever they want. I do assume that Donald Trump will be back on Twitter and some of the other bans. He's already said that he wants to get rid of the permanent bans.
Yep.
I could see him being able to do that. But I mean, for me personally, I don't really use it that much to where, I know there are people that literally spend all day on Twitter and use Twitter as like their main form of communication.
Yeah.
I don't think that will change all that much.
I don't think so
if
either.
you're that invested in it. But I mean, these things are pretty cyclic anyway, and I'm sure eventually there will be something else that replaces it.
I mean, it basically already kind of, I don't know. Twitter has always kind of had a more niche market, I guess you can say, where it grew pretty well in the, we'll say, late 2000s, early 2010s. But then after that, it really kind of peaked out and just didn't ever go beyond that. Obviously, Facebook just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and then Twitter just kind of stayed where it was.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's going to be even more the case now that you have other things like Instagram and TikTok.
Yeah, I think TikTok is the most used
Yes, now it
platform.
is. So
You just give your data directly to the Chinese government.
So I will say, I do like this article from The Verge that literally just says, "Welcome to hell, Elon." And the first line is, "You effed up real good, kiddo." Oh, The Verge. But no, I am a little bit concerned about what he's actually going to do when it comes to some policy. I agree with you that not too much is going to change. I think it's going to actually end up being a big nothing burger in the end. I would love to be correct on that. I really hope I'm not wrong. Knock on all the wood possible, but I guess we'll have to see.
Right. I mean, you're not going to be able to let people like Mike Lindell back on who are just going to spout a bunch of stuff about Dominion and get your entire company sued.
Well, right, exactly.
So I don't know. There's so many people. Oh, Elon. It's either you got people on one side saying Elon's going to completely destroy Twitter, and then the other side, oh, Twitter's going to be the greatest thing in the world now. And I just don't think it's going to change that much.
No, I don't think so either.
That was really a productive segment, wasn't it? It's hard to get any word in with this clown.
With the midterms getting closer in Wisconsin, ads attacking Mandela Barnes on an ending cash bill have skyrocketed.
Mm-hmm.
If you're living anywhere in the area, you probably have been getting pummeled with ads constantly saying that he's going to let criminals and violent people back into the streets.
Directly into your house. He's going to let them in. Rapists and murderers are coming to dinner, thanks to Mandela Barnes.
A bunch of those ads are also claiming that Darryl Brooks, the man who is behind the Waukesha tragedy, was released on inappropriately low cash bail. And they argue that Barnes is soft on crime, that he wants to eliminate eliminate cash bail to put other people like him back on the streets. So, did he actually want to end cash bail by any means? Well, of course he did. He's progressive, and that's what they do. In 2016, he co-authored AB 981 to eliminate monetary bail as a condition of release. So, what's so bad about that? Well, actually nothing. They're just trying to make Barnes look bad anyway.
Right. Well, our current system is how we got like, oh, this dangerous criminal who is let back out onto the streets under the current system, and Mandela Barnes wants reform.
Right. I mean, they have done the same thing also if you've seen the parole videos against Tony Evers and Mandela Barnes, where it's like all these people, that were like murderers and rapists and whatever it was, right? Have all been released by Tony Evers and Mandela Barnes, which they haven't. They're not part of the parole board, but whatever. And when you look at all these people, it's because they served, 20 to 30 year sentences.
They served their sentence under the guidelines that have always been in place.
Right. So there is no actual attack here. It's just scaring you. That's all it is. Barnes responded by saying, quote, "These commercials they are running are disgusting. They are lies and they misrepresent the facts of the situation and the issues of cash bail. The plan I proposed, the person in Waukesha wouldn't have got out if he paid $1,000 or $100,000, which was actually rated mostly true by PolitiFact, and we'll include that as well. State Rep Evan Goyke, a former public defender, agreed with Barnes' plans, saying, "The design of the system is to make sure people who pose a risk are in custody and held without the ability to buy their way out of jail. In many ways, this system would be tougher on crime because if an individual is held in custody on a pretrial detention order, they can't get out no matter what." So today, we wanted to look at what cash bail is, the history behind it, and what critics say about that system.
So let's look into the history of the bail system in the United States. As you can think of, generally, as the United States is expanding westward, there's a lot of towns and places where people can kind of get lost, and you have to travel long distances to go find them. So that's kind of where the bail system originated from. It was an incentive to keep people in the place where they're awaiting trial, and also have a monetary incentive for people to go find them if they did not appear. We start kind of codifying or structuring the system with the 8th Amendment to the Constitution, which says that excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishments inflicted. So for all of it's in the Constitution, well, the Constitution says that excessive bail shall not be required because it wasn't supposed to be a way to keep you locked up while awaiting your trial.
Correct.
It was just a means to try to make sure you actually showed up for the trial.
But that's a common issue with a lot of our Constitution dialogue, where our Constitution is not a set of rules. It is a framework that's intentionally vague. So when someone says something's in the Constitution, the idea of excessive bail, like what actually is excessive in this case, is supposed to be up for debate. So the idea that they're going to just point to saying it's in the Constitution means absolutely nothing.
And we go to the Bail Reform Act of 1966, which basically set that bail was, like we said, only as a means to control flight risk and not related to community safety. So it's not supposed to be a means to try to keep your community safer by keeping people locked up who have not been found guilty. We have this whole presumption of innocence that our legal system is supposed to be based on, where just because you're accused of a crime, you are innocent until proven guilty.
Yep.
And that's what the Bail Reform Act of 1966 tried to set into law, essentially. And it said that all persons charged with non-capital crimes were eligible for bail. Then we go to the Bail Reform Act of 1984, which essentially completely overturned the previous act of 1966 and codified the practice that was growing at the time of denying bail based on a perceived threat to the community. And this was even upheld by the Supreme Court in the case United States versus Salerno in 1987, where they were basically suing on this grounds of, bail being denied for a non-capital crime. The 8th Amendment says excessive bail shall not be required, and the Supreme Court basically did not side with the Constitution there and said, well, community safety is more important than your liberty. And it also fit in with Ronald Reagan's, who was president at the time, war on drugs, as the act mainly targets drug offenders, allowing them to be held without bail.
Which is where a lot of that 13th Amendment talk comes from, where we can reference that back in the show notes.
And then I want to talk a little bit about the bail bonds system. In Wisconsin, Wisconsin, it's not allowed, so I don't have a lot of personal experience. We don't have like bail bonds commercials.
Oh, I thought you were going to say you're not allowed to talk about bail bonds. I'm like, man, we're not that bad.
You know, we don't see those commercials on TV all the time. You don't have billboards and, you know,
Right.
bail bonds places all over the place. We're one of the few states that don't allow it, but that is the system in most of the country. So I think it should be something we discuss.
Sure.
The crazy thing is the United States and the Philippines are the only countries in the world that permit a for-profit bail bond industry. And the bail bond industry in the United States is estimated to be worth $2.4 billion annually. So that's literally, if you think of it, you know, bail bonds are usually about 10% of what your bail is. $2.4 billion, that means that bails are getting set across the country of $24 billion a year,
Yep.
which is crazy and shows that they are quite excessive. And they have also become, the bail bond industry is the biggest lobbyer against bail reform for obvious
I'll say
reasons.
shocking. Wow, never saw that.
And they spend millions of dollars lobbying Congress to not have any type of bail reform, even in states like Wisconsin, where the bail bond industry is not allowed. It's still in their best interest to stop any kind of reform, because once those things start happening and you see, oh, look, this state did it and everything's fine, that will create momentum, you know, for other states that do allow bail bonds, which they don't want.
Which we'll actually talk about is happening.
And it's funny, the start of the bail bond industry can actually be traced back to 1898, when Peter McDonough established America's first bail bond agency in San Francisco as a service to the customers of the tavern he ran with his brother Tom. So basically, your customer gets put in jail, and they would go to the constable, whatever, and pay their bail so that they can come back and drink in the bar. And they actually started offering all sorts of services, lawyers, like they were like a one-stop shop for anything legal related. You would go down to their bar.
There we go.
And they would take care of it. And their business became so lucrative that the brothers quickly became major figures in organized crime in the city, bribing local police to alert them of anyone who was arrested so that they could peddle their services to them, and even judges to make sure those people that did pay for their services were promptly released. And it was a whole, if you want to dig into it, you can. We don't have time in this episode, but there was a huge corruption scandal that revolved around these brothers, and it's a pretty interesting story for American history. And that's what the bail bond industry is based on. And the way it works, as we kind of alluded to, generally a bondsman will take a 10 to 15% payment of the required bail amount and will pledge to pay the full amount if the defendant does not show for the trial. This amount is never refunded, even if charges are dropped or the defendant is found not guilty. So you basically pay a 10 to 15% of your bail if you don't have the full bail amount, which most people don't. The bails are crazy, and you're paying that no matter what. Even if you're completely innocent, that's basically the fee for
That's just what it is.
you having come in contact with the police. And as we said, in Wisconsin, we don't allow bail bonds. One of only a handful of states. The others that don't allow it either are Illinois, Kentucky, which will continue to surprise us in
As
this
the progressive
conversation,
bastion.
which was the first state to not allow bail bondsmen in 1976. Maine, Massachusetts. And then we also have Nebraska and Oregon, who don't allow third-party bail bondsmen, but this state essentially acts the same exact way, and they take the 10% cut.
Oh, that's cool.
Right. So they're making the money and not the third party.
That's not corruptible in any way, shape, or form.
Right. So that's the system that we have currently, where you're generally at least paying 10% of what your bail is. If you're in a state that has third-party bail bondsmen, you're never getting that back, no matter what happens.
Cool. It's awesome.
And if you don't have the money, you sit in jail.
Great.
While you're, again, presumed innocent.
Should we talk about the supposed problems with that system?
If they weren't obvious, yeah.
Well, obviously, having a bail system based on paying large fines will obviously disenfranchise poor communities. What a shocker, right?
Right.
And according to the ACLU, the pretrial incarceration caused by unaffordable bail is the single greatest driver of convictions and is responsible for the ballooning of our nation's jail and prison populations. And since many communities of color are disproportionately poorer than white communities, hence all of our previous talks about that, cash bail also exacerbated racial inequalities at the same time. Unsurprising, nobody except for racists and Republicans.
Well,
But
you already said
it's the same
yeah.
thing. According to a 2015 report by the Vera Institute of Justice, annual admissions to jails nearly doubled between 1983 and 2013, from 6 million to 11.7 million. Nearly 75% of both pretrial detainees and sentenced offenders are in jail for nonviolent traffic, property, drug, or public order offenses. Nationally, African Americans are jailed at almost 4 times more the rate of white Americans, and 62% of people in jails are legally presumed innocent, awaiting their trial or resolution of their cases, or simply, too poor to pay their bail.
Yeah, that's more than 400,000 people currently detained while awaiting trial.
So I want to just pause on that really quick. So you have the vast majority of these people sentenced for nonviolent offenses. That's the big part, right? They do not pose a threat to anybody. And on top of that, 2/3 of those people are also just sitting there waiting for their trials. And that's why we have this ballooning population in jail.
And that is a huge cost. The cost of pretrial detainment is estimated at $13.6 billion annually, according to the Prison Policy Initiative. And all states, counties, and even between courts, like a circuit court, municipal court, all the amounts can vary, but the minimum time you can expect to wait between being booked into jail for a crime and your trial to begin is 3 weeks. And most average around 120 to 180 days, with extreme cases that take over a year. Now, I don't know about you, Joe.
I'm ready.
Could you sit in prison for 3 weeks awaiting trial, whether you did or didn't commit a non-violent offense, and still keep your job?
Well, no, I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't either. And we're better off than a lot of people, and it still would be completely devastating to us. I mean, what would generally happen is for bail that's in the thousands of dollars, I can maybe scrape that together, but I'd probably have to put up my house as collateral if it was any larger than that. And I have the ability to do that, but obviously most people don't.
Well, I think a lot of it also goes to show of let's actually put it this way. One of my favorite charitable organizations is called Modest Needs. And it's all based on the idea that you have people who are in like super dire circumstances and they just need help immediately. And then you have people who are completely well off. And a big portion of the ignored public are those who are just on the verge of hitting poverty, right? They are one car bill away of just not being able to afford anything anymore. And I think that's where in fact, the vast majority of Americans stand, where they're making ends meet, they're doing okay. But if you drop a $15,000 bill on them, good luck. Some may be able to pay it based on whatever networks they may have, whether it's their family, friends, relatives, whatever it may be. But a lot of people would not. If I had a $15,000 fee just thrown onto me in an instant, I would not do well. And I had to, like you said, I'd have to put something up or I had to start selling some things because I would not be able to just scrounge out together immediately without help.
Right. And so obviously this does cause people to lose their jobs, as we said. If they have places in shelters or group homes, if they're homeless, they will lose that.
Yep.
It would obviously put you behind on bills and rent or mortgage, and you can have your children taken away. And it means that you are less involved with your own legal defense. Because remember, this is pre-trial. You're contacting a lawyer or you're having a public defender assigned to you. You have to be able to meet with that person to prepare your defense.
So they literally have to come to jail,
right,
to talk to you. And we'll actually talk about some proposed fixes to that later.
And you're not able to do things like line up witnesses on your behalf.
Prepare documents.
Right.
Find documents. You can't go home.
And jails can be very violent places. A lot of times they're worse than prison. So a jail is generally where you're held awaiting trial. And then once you're sentenced, you would go to prison. Jails can be much more chaotic and dangerous places than prisons. And that's because you have just this big mix of people that are in for all types of different crimes, and it's not striated out like the prison system is by types of offenses and things like that. But it causes huge amounts of stress, can lead to lasting health problems. And then you also have the risk of, if you're involved in an altercation, that's generally going to mean further criminal charges.
Yep.
And on the other side of that, if you are able to pay bail and be free while awaiting your trial, your lawyer can actually use the fact that you haven't been charged with any additional crimes as proof that you're not a risk to society. And and can help your defense. And this is used as a tactic constantly by police and prosecutors to obtain plea deals, even if the person is innocent, because they can often get out of jail faster with time served by confessing rather than waiting for a trial.
Which is so messed up.
And I mean, it has lasting consequences because now you're convicted of a crime, you have a criminal record, and it's going to be harder to get a good job or buy a home. Again, just further compounding these structural issues.
And that brings us to Khalif Browder. A lot of critics of cash bail point to Browder's story. He is a 16-year-old who was sent to Rikers Island in 2010 on the charge of stealing a book bag. Browder pled not guilty, like Jason said, which meant he had two options awaiting trial: post $3,000 for bail, which his mother didn't have, or stay in custody. And since his family didn't have the money, Browder was sent to jail. Altogether, he spent 1,000 days in Rikers awaiting trial. 700 of those were in solitary. And it's because prosecutors kept delaying the court trying, just constantly making it worse. It was awful.
And I guarantee the police went to him and the prosecutors went to his attorney.
With plea deals.
Right. Yep. Saying just he can go home. He's just got to plead guilty to something that he probably didn't do.
Exactly. 3 years later, in 2013, prosecutors dropped the charge because he didn't do it. 3 years he spent in jail for a crime he didn't commit.
As a 16-year-old.
Yep. In 2015, Browder died by suicide, traumatized by the experience. And this was all laid out extremely well. I highly recommend anyone who's listening to this read it. The New Yorker put this all in an article called Before the Law, and it just goes very in-depth into Khalif's story, and it's tragic. It is horrifyingly tragic. And I don't know, man. If this is what can happen, the whole thing's broken. It needs to be going, it needs to be thrown in the trash.
Right. Well, I saw a video while we were preparing for this. I watched about I think it was called the Song Project. For Mother's Day, they went and bailed out 15 mothers who were awaiting trial, and they just didn't have money for bail. That's the only reason they were in jail. So on Mother's Day, they let these 15 people out, and they followed their stories, and 14 of the 15 showed up for trial, so one did not, and 8 of them, more than half, had their charges dropped. So they were basically in jail for nothing. Just a random sampling of 15 people, and 8 of them had their charges dropped.
Great. Awesome. That's fantastic. So what's being proposed instead? I want to start this with community bail funds. So this is actually a kind of what you just said, actually, a good grassroots way of combating people who are in poverty who cannot afford to post bail, and allows them to do so. You have grassroots and nonprofit organizations who will just constantly fundraise and raise money left and right and distribute money as they see fit to make sure that people will be able to post bail. That's great. That doesn't solve anything, though. It's a mere little band-aid because we cannot rely on community efforts to fix a systemic issue within our institutions. So a lot of states now are starting to move away from cash bail. That would include California, Illinois, Nebraska, Indiana, and New York. Other states have completely reformed their cash bail system, which are Kentucky, New Mexico, and New Jersey. And I found a great law review article here, which is also just a big comparative analysis of cash bail reform between North Carolina, Kentucky, and California, and how it fixed a lot of their issues there.
It is interesting that on that list, half of those 8 states, half of them are generally Republican states.
Yeah, exactly. So what exactly is being proposed? Well, the first thing is fixing the presumption of release versus presumption of detainment. We already talked about how a lot of people are put into jail immediately based on cash bail systems because that's just how the reforms are. I think, what was it, the 1889 Reform Act?
84.
84, thank you. That really just overhauled that entire presumption system. Presumption of release basically means it puts the burden back on prosecutors to prove the need for detention as opposed to the other way around, and helps significantly with making sure people are released appropriately. There's also increased house incarceration programs or house arrest programs. You may have heard of those. It's where a lot of people have electronic monitors on their ankles or on their body somewhere else. It allows a lot more liberty for defendants to be with family, go to work, or attend religious ceremonies. It also provides better opportunities for the defendant to assist with defense preparations. And that's kind of going back to what we talked about earlier, where you can now talk to potential witnesses, you can talk to your family, you can gain documents a lot easier because you're in your house. So if you need to find a specific form or whatever it may be, you can just go into your own drawer as opposed to finding someone else to do it for you. The issues with house arrest, though, may be a little obvious. Obviously, liberties are still impacted under this process. You can't just be free, as well as it's usually accompanied by a lot of fines. I believe in that same law review article in Kentucky, I want to say it was Georgia, that had weekly fines that the person had to pay as well, which also made it very problematic.
Right. You are generally expected to pay for the cost of the monitoring.
Yes.
Which, again, if people don't have the money, then they end up going to jail.
Correct. Another one is drug testing, where along with house arrests and releases, you also have random drug testings. It's a very common alternative to cash bail. However, recent studies have shown it doesn't actually lead to any improvements of defendants appearing in court. On top of that, they can actually be extremely inconvenient for defendants, which may impact their careers. And what I mean by that is when you are given notice by a parole officer or anything along those lines for a pretrial officer, you have a very short window of when you can deliver a drug test sample to them, which means if you're at work, you have to get out of work. If it means you're like way out of the area, you're not allowed to do that. So you have to try to come back immediately, or if with your family, it's super inconvenient.
Right.
So
need to find someone to watch your kids or whatever. Yeah.
And as we talked about before, a lot of people just can't leave their job to go do things. So that's also problematic. What's been seeing a lot of promise, though, was pretrial public safety assessments. The home for this progressive bail reform comes from the beautifully red state of Kentucky. Basically put, a set of pretrial criteria is meant to produce a risk score, and that would take into account of things like criminal history, likelihood of committing a new crime, etc., etc., etc. It then forces the judge to consider other factors outside of a defendant's likelihood to appear in court. And it also gives judges further discretion in a lot of cases, which judges like. Then there's also a lot of issues where I think in California and New York, where there's actually a lot more rules and regulations for judges to follow. There's still a lot of debate about how much discretion a judge should have, where judges like the idea of having more nuanced opinions involved in their decision-making processes. However, other research has shown that judges usually just refer to stereotypes and racial stereotypes and lots of things like that. So actually, judges' discretion is actually a bad thing. So it's still being debated as we speak now.
Yeah, and I've definitely seen that criticism of some of these assessments, like they use algorithms and things, which tend to end up being pretty racist in the end.
Right. So it's still being fought out. But here's some good promising news. I told you we were promising stuff here, right? Studies from California and New Jersey looked at pretrial assessment systems, and it showed that fewer arrests took place because of this. Significantly more defendants were released, length of time in jail was decreased, and released defendants appeared in court at the same rate, if not higher in some instances, than with cash bail. That's pretty good, because the whole point of cash bail, like Jason said, is to make sure that defendants appear in court. And if you can have defendants appear in court without the need for cash bail, then you should reform the system. The biggest criticism of this, though, is that it will always be difficult to predict defendants' behavior. So when future crimes are committed, the judge and the system are left to blame. Basically, if you have somebody that goes out and they're kind of given the, okay, yes, you don't pose a risk to anybody, and then they go steal a car. That was on the judge. There's nothing you can really do about that. Or if it's based on the system, that's on the algorithm. So there's still issues that need to be worked out, but it does seem a lot better than the cash bail system we have.
Right. I mean, it still happens where people out on bail commit crimes too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But like I said, it's at no greater risk than the cash bail.
And it's much more equitable.
I also found a really interesting program from Santa Clara County called the No Cost Release Program. And they tried to take a more proactive approach and created an entire campaign to inform incarcerated individuals and those surrounding that community about non-monetary release options. It was a huge communication strategy to inform individuals, debunk misconceptions about bail, and advertise non-monetary solutions. And they had like a huge just ask poster campaign. They posted it everywhere, sent out mailers with court dates and things like that. So what would happen if an actual campaign took that to heart and tried to make a difference for once, right? The No Cost Release Program emphasized 2 pretrial release alternatives for detainees who can be safely released. One was own recognizance, OR, release, which allowed for detainees release on the condition that he or she will return in court on his or her own volition. The other option was the similar supervised own recognizance release program, or the SORP, which had the added condition of being supervised by a pretrial officer. This option was used for higher risk detainees who may have had substance abuse issues, alcohol use issues, mental health disorders, or a record of domestic violence. People released under the SORP may be subject to drug or alcohol testing and may be assigned to an electronic monitoring device, which is kind of the whole house incarceration system we talked about earlier. And I'll include an entire case study on that program as well. And they found very similar results. People who chose the non-monetary options actually sometimes did better than those with cash bail, and it increased throughout the years based on the mailers and reminders that they were being sent through digital and mail services. Sounds great. So why haven't we done this yet? Well, it's because, shockingly, there's tons of criticism and misconceptions about these reforms.
And I think it is too important to point out that generally where you're getting criticism and pushback against bail reform comes from, one, the bail bond industry.
Yep.
As we talked about, they spent millions of dollars. They spent $3 million trying to fight California's.
100%, yes.
Right, where they made it go to a referendum after it was signed into law because they spent $3 million collecting signatures to send in. And it was a bail bonds industry group that coordinated all of that and delivered the signatures.
Yep.
You also get sheriffs. Generally, in most areas, your jails are under the supervision of the sheriff's department, and they make money. They get their budget based on the jail population. And if you decrease the jail population by 60%, that's going to decrease their budgets.
Yep.
So they, and again, have a monetary incentive to keep people detained while awaiting trial. And then you generally have policemen and police unions who, again, talk about a system that needs reform. They don't see people as innocent until proven guilty. Every person that they put in jail, they think needs to stay there. And they don't like when they see people being released. And they consider it to be, a safety risk, the same scare tactics that we're going to talk about here in a minute. But those are the groups that you generally see opposed to this for different reasons.
I mean, we also just have for-profit prisons that just want to have more people in prison, too.
Right. Well, generally the prison, we're talking about jail. Yeah, right now, jail and pre-conviction.
But still, they have a monetary incentive to keep.
Well, you like we said, you do have more people that plead guilty because they want to get
correct
out of this and not sit in jail forever awaiting their trial, which does increase the prison population as well.
Correct. So let's get to some misconceptions. Number one and number two, technically at the same time. More criminals are going to be allowed back on the streets, making our communities less safe, and people will be more likely to skip their court dates if cash bail is abolished. What do you think, Jason?
I think I just learned that that's not true.
Nope, not at all. Again, numerous studies from states all around the country, some of which we just discussed earlier, show that defendants' rates of appearance for trial after reforms were implemented are either similar, if not better sometimes, compared to the rates of appearance with cash bail. Also, rates of arrest were also similar, if not better. So it just makes things overall better for the community.
And again, all of those things that you're worried about are not solved under the cash bail system. It just whether or not you have money.
Exactly. Misconception number two, violent criminals will be set free. Again, nope. According to most pretrial assessment systems, like the law Barnes proposed in 2016 and the ones we talked about, would give judges discretion if there was clear evidence that the defendant would harm themselves or others.
And that's, they talk about the Waukesha, the guy who drove through the parade, as an example, because he was a violent offender who had a history of domestic violence.
Yep.
And in a lot of these reforms, it's that type of person that would not be allowed to have bail or would at least be monitored, unlike the cash bail system where you pay your money and you're free to go.
Well, and that's where I think this is the most applicable misconception when it comes to those Republican attack ads, because you'll constantly see them just put faces and stuff out there, the Willie Horton style ads that we talked about in Political Advertising 101 episode, just to scare you, thinking that Barnes and Evers are removing cash bail that will put more violent criminals on the streets like so-and-so who committed murder, like so-and-so who stabbed someone. No, in fact, it's the opposite. It's literally the opposite. Bail reform systems will actually be harsher on violent criminals if there is clear evidence that they will hurt someone else or themselves. And that has been shown in multiple studies throughout the country. Misconception number 3 or 4 or whatever it was. I don't know anymore. Bail reform will be too expensive and will cost taxpayers large amounts of money. As Jason said, detaining people in jails is super expensive. I think, what was it, 13 point something billion dollars a year? $13.6 billion annually. That's pretty close.
Yep, for over 400,000 people. So, yes, it will cost money to monitor people, to go through these pretrial assessments.
Of course.
But it's still going to cost less money than we're already spending on the system we have now.
For example, because of course we have examples, in Los Angeles County, pretrial detention costs about the city of $177 a day per person, while releasing the defendant, even with conditions, costs $26 at most. A huge reduction in cost. Another example from Philadelphia, the city controller, Alan Budkovitz, what a name, reported that the city could earn over $75 million a year by reforming its cash bail system. And another one from Ohio, the Dayton Daily News reported that bail reform measures in Ohio could similarly save the state an estimated $67 million a year.
Mm-hmm. And then you have the whole issue, too, of you're letting people spend more time with their families as they're awaiting trial, instead of literally just putting them together with other criminals. That is an obvious way to help prevent crime in the future.
Yes.
Giving them their support structure and having, all those other influences in their life instead of being in a prison system, which dehumanizes you and makes you much more likely to commit crimes in the future.
So, with all that said, Jason, should we reform cash bail?
I believe we should end cash bail.
I think so too. Not only is ending cash bail the morally right thing to do, like Jason just said, it saves us money, it keeps our communities safer anyway, and actually better than cash bail systems. And it would just actually make sure that our systems run more efficiently overall over time, because it gets more junk like the for-profit systems that we just talked about earlier out of the system.
It would probably speed up the court cases as well.
Absolutely. You won't have a Khalif Browder anymore.
Right. You don't have the incentive to, we'll just keep him sitting in there and eventually he'll take a plea.
Exactly. And again, I fully understand that we are not law experts. We are not criminal justice experts. There are even nuances that we did not even get into. I understand that.
I've never even been in jail.
But the data doesn't lie. Cash bail is destroying lives and destroying our communities and costing us a fortune doing it. We should end it. And for anyone who's trying to tell you that actually any Democrat like Mandela Barnes is bad for trying to end it, send them this episode and let them know how wrong they are.
And we will be off next week. So our next episode will either be a very enthusiastic post-midterm rundown or a very commiseratory one.
Either way, we're drinking, baby. I'll see y'all after election. Go vote and go tell everyone you have to go vote. And not just vote. Vote for the right people. If you vote for Tim Michaels, you're a bad person.
And the snakes in his hair will bite you.
Thank you for listening. We hope to see you in the next episode. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter at ThinkProPod. You can email us at thinkpropod@gmail.com. And remember, when in doubt, think progressively. I was going to do a joke about how you're hungover, but I didn't feel like it.
My voice does sound a bit deeper, I can tell.